Good afternoon and welcome. We'll give folks a little minute to connect here. We'll have folks dropping in, I'm sure, for the next couple of minutes. We're glad you're here today. Hey, if you're game, we'd love for you to flip your cameras on, take yourself off of face mute. If you're worried about what you look like, I have to deal with this all the time, so it's fair game. We're glad you're here. Hi, Celeste. Oh, I like your background. I can tell that's a nice day there.
Hey, Noel.
Hey, Wayne Bailey.
How are you?
See your face. Celeste, you are on mute, but you can unmute yourself if you want to respond to Brandon.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I said I knew you'd all be jealous. This is why I was going to keep that video off.
Yeah, if you're gonna turn it on, you gotta use it for leverage.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful day. What part of the world are you in?
I'm in the panhandle of Florida.
Oh,
Yeah.
Nice.
It is a great day. We've had some stormy days, but today is really nice.
yeah.
And I had to kind of like semi working, semi keeping kids. And so I had to get away. And so I chose the porch.
Good for you. A couple of years ago, it was on the table to move to a warmer weather city. My ex and I were both gonna move to the same city, look for a house in that same city. Florida's top of my list. And she bought a house here in Denver where we already live. So
Oh, Denver's great.
Denver is great.
Mhm.
It's not the panhandle, but it's pretty good.
We had a place for a while between Gunnison and Montrose up in
Oh,
the
yeah.
San Francisco. It was really nice. Yeah.
Oh,
I miss
gosh, beautiful place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's give folks just another 90 seconds or so. We'll see if anybody else joins us. Victoria, Jason, Darren, Mariano, Rob, Joanne, thanks for being here. Haven't greeted you yet. If you didn't hear earlier, we'd love for you, if you're willing and if you're in a spot where it works, you can take yourself off of, yeah, put yourself on camera. That's great. Thanks, Darren. Oh, wait, you're a Braves fan? What is that, A? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Darren.
Yeah, it's Atlanta Braves.
That's the Braves. All right, well, I don't want to start any fights, so you may have to go back on face mute and take yourself off camera. I'm in Denver, so we have a phenomenal baseball team here. It's a minor league team called the Colorado Rockies. That's how they play anyway. All right, well, let's do this. Let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad that you're here. You can see on the screen, and if you would, go ahead and mute your microphones. I'll have you pop off a couple of times, pop on and take yourselves off of mute a couple of times and interact and things like that, but just to make sure everybody can hear. Let's get started. So thank you for being here today. Couple of things. The webinar is being recorded. You're going to receive a link to the recording, the presentation, the resources. We'll go for about 30 minutes plus 15 minutes Q&A. I'd rather mix the Q&A in. So if you do have any questions at any time, submit them via chat. Turn your camera on again if you're game, and we're going to use features like polling, chat, annotation, things like that. I'm Brandon Pipkin. I'll be your host today. With me as well as the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates, Noelle Michaelenko. She's here to answer all the tough questions. So you can direct chat her with the tough ones and send it to the general chat with all the others. So the concepts that we're going to talk about today, just to give you a feel, the things that we're going to talk about today are based on the work of 3 books. Trusted Advisor, which was written in the early 2000s, Trust-Based Selling, and the Trusted Advisor Field Book. So at Trusted Advisor Associates, we have over 20 years of helping professionals build stronger, more trust-based relationships. And we do that through workshops, online learning, custom programs, and coaching. And with that, let's get started into the meat of today. I'd like to invite you to call to mind a situation where you broke trust. So not where somebody broke trust with you, but where you broke somebody else's trust. Think about what caused that trust to be lost And if you're willing, go to the chat and type into the chat one word or a couple of words. What was it that caused the trust to be lost in that situation? When you broke trust, what caused that trust to be broken? Use the chat. Good. So Noel not following through on a commitment. Darren, an accident, not thinking. For me, situation where I wanted to look good, or a couple of times chose to look good over doing the right thing. Went around a key stakeholder without informing them. Yeah, and told to do it by your manager. Yeah. That puts you in a tough spot, Jason, doesn't it? Promise you couldn't keep, Victoria. Thanks for sharing that one. Yeah. Oh my, Celeste, that does not feel good, does it? Wow. Situation where you thought you could trust that person with that information, right? Yeah.
Well, and in my case, it was trivial information, but used as an example in the sermon. And it was it just made me, feel really bad that I'd even shared that, it was silly, but yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. It's quite a situation. Sorry that you were in that. Wayne, a commitment from your leadership that you presented that was not lived up to. Yeah. So circumstances, it sounds a little bit beyond your control there. It doesn't feel good when we break trust, right? When those situations happen. And I want you to keep these situations in mind as we go forward today, because the concepts that we talk about don't mean anything unless we can apply them to the real world. So the concepts that we're going to talk about today, the first thing we'll cover is one big myth about lost trust. And then we'll dive into 3 common reasons why we lose trust. Most importantly, we're going to talk about the 5 steps to recovering trust. And then we'll think about how do we put this into action so that it wasn't just a fun webinar for 45 minutes, but we actually get some value out of it and can do something about it. So the first thing that I want to cover is the one big myth about lost trust, which is this. Oftentimes we think about trust as something that's incredibly fragile, and that if broken, it shatters into a million pieces like the wine glass and cannot be put back together in any form that it resembled previously. But that's just not quite true. First of all, if trust is extremely fragile, what does that mean about the state of the relationship in the first place? And secondly, trust really works a lot more like a forest after a fire. Remember it had to have been 35, 40 years ago now or something, that Yellowstone had a major fire. And I remember reading about how after the fire, the forest came back even more vibrant and beautiful than it was before, and species that had not been there for years came back, both flora and fauna. And it confused me at the time how that could happen. And what I didn't understand is that trust follows the same principles that a lot of human and natural principles follow, which is rupture and repair. If you think about your relationships that are of value to you in your life, no relationship is conflict-free, especially the most valuable relationships to you. I would submit that those relationships probably have some of the most conflict in them. Why? Because conflict is inevitable, and because we get passionate about things and we see things from a certain perspectives. That in and of itself is not the problem. Conflict within relationships is not the problem. It's what we do about it. Just like somebody who is lifting weights, what they're doing is they're rupturing their muscle. But if they take care of their body after lifting weights, those muscles can come back even stronger. So the big myth about trust is that it's fragile like the wine glass, when really it follows the natural principles of rupture and repair. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. With that, let's talk about the 3 common reasons why we lose trust. Does anybody want to take themselves off of mute and talk just a little bit more, in as much as you can? And I don't want you to share anything personal or anything private, but if you think about that situation where you broke trust, or if you think about where somebody broke trust with you, what was the real reason behind it? You can go to the chat or you can take yourself off mute. Jennifer, you took yourself off mute. Did you want to chime in?
Yes, dishonesty.
Dishonesty. Yep. That is absolutely one of the main causes of lost trust. Personal gain, Darren. Yes. Yeah, back to my situation. I wanted to look good. I wanted to save face. And that focus on me caused lost trust. Demonstrated self-interest versus others' interest. This is good. So it's like you guys have read the book or something, talking about self-interest and others' interest. Yeah, whatever the reason for which we lose trust, they can roughly be bucketed into 3 things. Unfulfilled commitments. We said we were going to do something and then we didn't do it. Or we said, let's see, I knew I was going to confuse myself on, we didn't do something we said we were going to do, or we did something that we said we wouldn't do. So unfulfilled commitments, a lack of transparency, dishonesty, as you mentioned, Jennifer. And Brian, you chimed in, getting a bill with more items on it than was promised in the quote. Yeah, so that would fall under that lack of transparency right there. And then another reason, and Darren, I'm so glad you put into the chat what you did. Another reason that we lose trust with people is honest mistakes. We're human. Sometimes we blow it. Now, it's important to note what we're going to talk about when we get to the 5 steps of recovering lost trust. We're not talking about superficial relationships because, as I mentioned, if trust is lost really easily, was it really there to begin with? But there can be significant situations and relationships in our lives where an honest mistake, we thought we were doing the right thing, turned out to not work so well for us. And that's where we get into the conversation about impact versus intent. Does anybody want to make an argument for which one is more important when it comes to losing trust? Was it our intent more important or the impact more important? You can go to the chat, take yourself off mute. Anybody want to make an argument for either one of those? Jennifer says, and Jason, impact. Jennifer said, do what you say, not just what you say or think. Intent is about us. Impact is about others. Jason, have you thought about writing a book? I like the way you phrase that. That's good. Intent is about us. Impact is about others. Impact for sure, says Brian. Impact, although unintended, can result in damaged relationships. It sure can. Yep. So we see this a lot, or I see it in the work that I do with leaders. If you've ever read the book, Leadership and Self-Deception, what I took from that book was, you may have a wonderful intent, and that's great, but all that really matters for the other person is the impact. And that's not to say that we can't share what our intent is and try to come to a resolution if we break the trust by sharing, here's what I genuinely intended to do. But the impact really is about the other people. Thank you, Jason, for that. So chime into the chat again. Don't want this just to be me chatting and talking the whole way through this. When you did that thing earlier that lost trust, can you just put it into one word? How did it feel when you lost that trust? Oof, ashamed, says Noel. Ditto. Yeah. Shame, humiliating. Yeah, ashamed. Yeah, the word ashamed is coming up a few times. Sad. I felt icky. Yeah, it just doesn't feel good, right?
Brandon, I didn't know you were going to go with the super technical speak there.
It's super technical. Yeah, that's a psychological term. Icky. Well, yeah, those feelings don't feel very good. And so I do want to remind you, though, that to err is human. Sometimes we blow it, and sometimes it's an honest mistake. Sometimes it's something that's pretty significant. We have done something to really blow it and to lose somebody's trust, maybe through multiple unfulfilled commitments. Maybe it's through a big lack of transparency or a series of smaller lacks of transparency. Whatever it is, keep in mind that that broken trust isn't as much about what you did so much as it is about what you're going to do going forward. Keep in mind that cycle of rupture and repair. So if there is a relationship in your life that can benefit from recovering trust, keep in mind that just like the muscle that gets stronger after it's been strained, a relationship can get stronger after it's been strained if we honestly acknowledge what's happened, take responsibility for it, and move forward and use that natural flow of rupture and repair. I'll pause here. Are there any questions or thoughts that are coming up before we dive into the 5 steps of recovering lost trust? Anything you'd like to share, questions, thoughts that are coming? All right. At any time, go ahead and share if you have them. So let's talk about then the 5 steps to recovering lost trust. Before I give you all the answers, I'd like you to give me some of them. And then, of course, Noel, if we're enterprising, what we'll do is we'll take these, we'll use them in a future webinar and call them our own, of course. Oh, wait, that wouldn't be very trusted. If you would, everybody share with me, if you were to give advice to somebody else who came to you, let's say it's a colleague, and they came to you asking for advice on how to repair a broken relationship or broken trust, more specifically, what would you tell them to do to repair that broken trust? You can put in one word, you can put in a couple of words, type a sentence. What advice would you give to somebody else about recovering lost trust? Own your mistakes, says Wayne. Start a conversation, Victoria. Validate the other person's thoughts, feelings, and the impact of the lost trust. Talk to the other person. Listen and apologize. Don't try to explain your point more. Oh, Brian, are you sure about that one? It seems the more I try to explain my point, the better it gets, at least in my own mind. Jennifer says, review what happened, discuss thoughts and feelings and actions, set expectations for moving forward, consistency and time. That's great. So that it's really useful sometimes to think about, as a mindset hack, what advice you would give to somebody else if they were in a similar situation to what you're in. That can be a helpful hack to help us move through difficult situations. The reason for it is that recovering lost trust can be very uncomfortable. Why? Because, as Wayne said, we have to own what we've done. And we have to own that embarrassment, that shame, those feelings that don't feel very good. And it's much more comfortable sometimes to just walk away from the situation, or sometimes blame the other person for the interaction. If we can take ourselves out of that and look at it as a third party using the mindset hack, it helps ease us into leaning in to those tough conversations. And one of the skills that we're not going to cover today, but we'll send you as one of the resources, is a resource that we call Name It and Claim It. That's a tool that can help us press into uncomfortable situations and own what we're feeling so that we can have productive, real conversations with other people. Ina says, show vulnerability and create intimacy. Oh, you have read the book, Creating Intimacy. So let's talk about this. Some of you already know these kinds of terms. So before I launch into the 5 steps of recovering lost trust, I'd like to set the context that recovering lost trust is predicated on the same principles and same elements as building trust is. So at Trusted Advisors, we have an equation for trust. Trust is the equivalent of credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. So for those of you who loved math, you understand that the 3 elements on top, all divided by the one on the bottom, either are multiplied, they either get multiplied or they get extremely diminished by the denominator there, the self-orientation. Credibility is about the words that we use. So this speaks to, did we have a lack of transparency when we broke the trust? Reliability speaks to our ability to follow through on things. So this would be broken commitments. The I, and thank you, Ina, for this, stands for intimacy, which we understand is an intentionally provocative word in the business sense. And what we're talking about there is safety. Does the other person feel safe with you? Do they feel safe sharing information? And the denominator of self-orientation that adds to our trust equation is where our focus is. And I love that this came up a few times in the chat. Self-orientation is the degree to which we are interested in our own gain or the degree to which we're interested in other people. Now, there are times when we can be interested in other people, but we're only interested in them for our own gain. And if that's the case, we have a high self-orientation. So whether we're focused on ourselves or whether we're focused on others for our own gain, what that means is we have a high self-orientation, and therefore credibility, reliability, and intimacy would all be diminished by that self-focus. Now, these are the 4 principles, as I mentioned, that we're going to use to recover lost trust. And the reason that it takes all 4 elements is that most people try to recover trust rationally. We identify what went wrong and we fix the problem. Now that's credibility. Then we commit to not do it again. So we use reliability and we follow through on it. The problem is it resolves the issue itself, but it's not enough. If you think about it this way, raise your hand if you've had to call either your cell phone provider or your internet service provider in the last year because of a problem. Raise your hand if you've had to do that. Noel has, Jason has, yeah, Jennifer. Jennifer, Jason, were you on hold any less than 5 minutes? Or was it longer than that? You're both smiling and laughing as if that would never be a thing, right? So if you think, go ahead, Jason, what were you going to say?
No, I was gonna say I wish it was less than 5 minutes, but
Wouldn't that have been awesome, right?
Yeah.
What typically happens is we have the initial problem, we call during our lunch break, which is limited time anyway, and then we're placed on hold for 15 minutes or more. We get somebody who's on the phone who's very apathetic and who asks us, which question, Jason and Jennifer? Have you tried to restart your modem? After you're half bald because you're pulling out your hair, you say, yeah, I've done that 9 times that the app told me to do because I already went to the app. And it just feels like this colossal waste of time. When you're 45 minutes deep into that call, the problem of the internet not working is no longer the problem. The problem in that moment is that now you've wasted a ton of time, a ton of energy, and you are frazzled and frustrated and you are not getting the help that you need. So they fix your internet issue, but do you really feel a lot better? So back to this point, when we try to recover trust and we do it only rationally and solve the issue, it's not quite enough. And that's because the real damage of broken trust is emotional. The initial issue is really not the issue when trust is broken because the impact is deeper than the issue. The real impact is to the person. And that's where we need the emotional elements of the trust equation of intimacy and self-orientation. And we've got to resolve those 2 things because when we've broken trust, what somebody feels is that they're no longer safe with us, or they may feel like we don't care about what happens to them as a person. So simply resolving the issue isn't enough. And that's why we need to go beyond that and work all 4 elements of the trust equation to recover lost trust. The first step in recovering lost trust has to do with getting off our S. We have to have an awareness that something is wrong and that we've broken trust. The reason that involves self-orientation is we have to get out of our own world and see things from the other person's perspective and recognize that something has gone awry there. The second thing that we need to do also involves self-orientation, and that is to make an assessment. Consider what we've done to either create or contribute to a situation where we have broken that trust. And it may be that situation, I forgot who put it in. Wayne, was it you, who's your boss told you to do something and then, oh, it turned out really not to be very fun? Was that you, Wayne? Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Right? And so even though we may not be technically at fault here, the assessment invites us to look at what was my role in this. Totally unintended, but to the other person, it still had an impact. The third thing to repairing broken trust or recovering it is active listening. Listening to and acknowledging the other person's perspective and experiences, which is both reducing our self-orientation and increasing intimacy, as Ina mentioned. Because what it does is, as many of you mentioned in the chat, inviting that conversation lets the other person know, I value you. And honestly listening to and acknowledging their perspective tells them, I value you. It goes a long way to repairing broken trust. You notice that the first three steps here are all emotional before we ever get to the rational elements of recovering broken trust. And that is because what we mentioned, the real damage is emotional at that point. So what we need to do is create that safe environment where the other person can hear the rational elements of what we're doing to recover that trust, which includes accountability, taking responsibility for our part and apologizing when appropriate. That is credibility, which involves our words, and it also involves that self-orientation, again, because we're getting away from our own ego and what we want to be, how we want to feel safe in that moment. And that requires leaning into the discomfort. And then the fifth step is combining all of these steps together and combining all four variables of the trust equation of credibility, reliability, intimacy, and self-orientation in a commitment to not do that thing again, a commitment to follow through on our commitments, a commitment to lean into the other person and to see things from their perspective and to value their experience just as much as our own. Any questions or thoughts that are coming up on the 5 steps to recovering lost trust?
Hey, Brandon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit the other day, but I'm curious to hear from you and from others on the webinar. What changes what changes if maybe we're not the one who lost trust? Maybe it's something somebody else did to us. So like we're the ones who are not trusting others.
And specifically the question of what changes. Say a
Yeah.
little bit more about the question.
So, I'm thinking about recovering lost trust. My default when people ask me, what do I do when I'm working with somebody who's not trustworthy? Is I always say, look, trust is a choice. You can choose to trust the person or not. But it occurs to me as we're going through this, a lot of this applies not just for when I've lost trust. I've done something that has caused trust to be lost. But I'm now listening to you talk about it, thinking about times when I've stopped trusting other people. And maybe there's a way to rebuild some of that trust rather than just walk away from them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious what your perspective is and if anybody else on the webinar thinks about whether it's worth going back and trying to rebuild lost trust if it was someone else's fault.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to hear thoughts on that. My default position originally growing up, as I did, a bit of a people pleaser, my default always would be, if somebody broke trust with me, to over analyze and take more responsibility for the situation and try to connect with them. Darren, is that, yeah, you understand that, right? Yeah, do you want to join People Pleasers Anonymous? Because I'm the president. I'm recovering, but president of the club. And so that would absolutely be my default, would be to run and try to repair it at all costs. And that's unhealthy. But nowadays, I may walk away far too soon without giving the person enough opportunity, without me leaning into some of the discomfort and mentioning, hey, here's a situation and here's how it affected me. What do you all think?
I personally think that some people, I mean, we can lose trust as professionals, as grown adults, as, people who are aware, but some people that break our trust have no awareness and don't even know what it takes to have trust. So I think it might be up to us with boundaries, of course, like you're talking about, Brandon, of not getting just like destroyed, but to kind of teach people what you expect. I know I'm on my second marriage. This is going to be the last one, but the first one, active listening was not a part of it. I didn't grow up with it. I didn't have it in my marriage. My husband now taught me that. So, I think we have a little bit of a responsibility to another human of teaching a little bit too. So I would say there's an opportunity for teach and not assuming that that person's doing something vindictive or out to get you, but maybe they just don't have the skills to even know how to form trust based on their experiences.
Nice. I like it. Thanks for that, Jennifer. So sometimes we can aid by having healthy boundaries, but leaning into the tough conversation and letting them know, here's the impact of what's happening right now. Nice. Thank you. Darren, you took yourself off mute as well. Do you want to share a thought?
Yeah, sort of like you. I'm definitely a people pleaser, but and I hope that as I get older, I'm not becoming cynical and bitter. But a recent situation, unfortunately, at the office has left me in a situation where I really don't care to rebuild that relationship with that person. And it's very unfortunate because at one point we worked very well together. But once I realized and saw and heard from others what this person was doing behind my back, it'll take a lot for me to step forward and say, let's rebuild this. I forgive you. I have forgiven the person, but I don't really want to have anything to do with that person again.
Sure. And I suppose this maybe gets into a deeper conversation. Is it worth letting them know without trying to rebuild? Is it worth letting them know, I'm very hurt by this. I understand that this has happened. I'm not interested at this point anyway in trying to rebuild anything, and I'm going to keep my distance from you. This is how this impacted me.
I don't think that is always a beneficial thing to do. I think that from an HR perspective, I think sometimes that ends up causing dissension within the ranks. Sometimes it's better off keeping your thoughts to yourself.
I think there was an important distinction, excuse the plane going by, an important distinction there that he made. Is it Brandon? Sorry, I missed your name,
Yeah.
but between whether to go back and trust them and forgiving, because obviously there's hurt there and you may not want to forgive them, but the forgiveness or unforgiveness is not going to affect them. It's going to affect you.
Right.
And so that's the thing we want to work on ourselves is, okay, how can I forgive this person? And that's a very hard thing to do. And sometimes it's helpful to look and just to understand there's always other factors in people's lives that we never understand, especially if we aren't around them a lot. And so sometimes that helps me to try to find forgiveness because I'm not walking in their shoes. I don't understand what they've been through. I don't understand how they grew up. I don't understand the relationships in their home. I don't understand all their relationships at work. And so, okay, can I throw a bone in there and say, okay, they've reacted in a way that hurt me. I don't like it, but I will go forward with it. And I can find some forgiveness there, understanding that there may be other factors that I don't understand. But the next question is, do I want to continue them in my life or not? And so it's important to keep that distinction. And of course, obviously, you make that choice as to whether how important that relationship is. is whether, how many more times you're going to give them, how much more trust are you going to give them? Or perhaps you can keep the relationship, but just don't trust them in that one particular area until there's been more time or more healing in that area. So,
Yeah. Which brings up a great conversation, Celeste, that we often have at Trusted Advisors, because there are 4 variables of the trust equation. We might not trust somebody in a certain area, but we may trust them in another. A really cheeky example that we use is I may trust my dog with my life, but not with my lunch. Right? And so I may trust somebody that what they say is credible. They never have lied to me. I can trust what they say. They always give me the scoop. And I may even trust that it's safe to share information with them. But every time I want to get together with them, they're 15 minutes late. They say they're going to call me sometimes and they don't call me. So I can trust them in some areas, but not in others. And that can play into this conversation as well, for sure. And thanks for the thoughts, Victoria. Yeah, from an HR perspective, there are so many things to think through and be aware of. And sometimes for our own sanity, yes, folks, it is sometimes best that we just keep that distance there. And
I think there's some, whoever was made the comment about some people are very unaware of their own lack of trustworthiness. I think that can fall into a lot of things. And somebody gave me an example of this very recently, especially in companies where you have multiple generations. There's an inherent lack of trust, but it's more developed out of a lack of understanding. This example was the senior partners who are the baby boomers, if you will. They know how to get water. They know how to drink. They know how to get to water. They know how to find it. They know how to drink it. They know how to do everything. Then you have your brand new baby attorneys who don't really know how to get water. They don't even know that they're thirsty. Those 2 types of people to understand each other is relatively impossible until they sit down and have a conversation to say, I didn't know you were thirsty. And the other person says, I didn't know that you didn't know how to get the water. There's a major lack of understanding in a lot of areas.
definitely. Which is why I loved that so many of these answers, when I asked what advice would you give to somebody else to recover lost trust, involved having the conversation. So to kind of sum up some of those points, and then I'll turn it back over to Noelle and see if she's got any additional thoughts on her own question, which is brilliant. There are situations where really we deem the situation unsafe or unhealthy, and it is wise to walk away from that. Other times it's worth leaning into. If the other person has done something to destroy the trust or to break the trust, it is worth leaning in and having a conversation to understand them, to see where they're coming from. And then when it's us who has broken the trust, of course, it's our great opportunity to do these 5 things, regardless of how we may feel about the other person, because however they feel about us or we feel about them, the opportunity to take control of that and to recover the trust in as much as we can, it does something ennobling for us. It does something to live in integrity and to know that we've done what we can to repair that relationship. Noelle, any additional thoughts on this discussion? Your question?
Yeah, it really was a very honest question, right? Because I approach these things, I tend to have a somewhat cerebral approach to this stuff. And so what struck me from the very beginning, I think, Jennifer, you're the first person who said it, and then Celeste followed up with it. And Victoria, this concept of empathy, not just empathy in the sense of understanding that somebody else might be experiencing a tough day, but also that empathy of they may not even be aware that what they did caused a loss of trust. And I'm thinking back to a situation a couple of years ago where one of my best friends and I didn't even speak for, it was like 6 months. And it was just one of these crazy things where I said something, the way she interpreted it, I did not intend, right? Intent and impact. That's a really great way to think about it. And honestly, it had a boomerang effect, because she got angry with me for saying something, and I was just so frustrated because she didn't even want to consider that my intentions had any play in it at all, that I got frustrated and went, well, if you're gonna be like that, and it was ridiculous. But in hindsight, thinking about this, I wish I would have much earlier gone back to her and said, listen, I know that I did something and I want to make that better. And it's also very difficult for me because I feel hurt in response to this. And so it really just goes back to that opening the dialogue. But that interjection of empathy there, really, that's a really great point. Sorry, I know that wasn't particularly articulate, but I'll turn it back to you, Brandon. And thank you all for joining the conversation.
Yes, thank you all. This is one of the things I love about the work we do at Trusted Advisor Associates is that trust is so broad. There's so many factors to it. There's so much to think through that we have. Noelle's been at this. She's been CEO for how many years now, Noelle? 7 years or something like that. And
Charlie retired during the pandemic, so 3 maybe.
Three, but you've been associated with Trusted Advisors a couple of years before that, right? And still there are many conversations to be had around trust and building it, recovering it. True relationship conversations, true connection conversations. It just thrills me. So thank you all for your thoughts there. Brian, you've got your hand up.
Oh, one thing I was sort of curious about when we break trust, and I'm thinking B2B relationship, these days, people can just disappear and ghost you, right? So maybe you had a slip up with someone or whatnot, and now they're not responding, and you're trying to clarify. You can't go through these steps if they're just not going to talk to you. So,
yes.
Thankfully, it doesn't happen often, but it can to any of us.
Absolutely.
And I know you guys are about out of time, but I'm sort of curious how one gets past that, or maybe it's a lost cause, or you lightly ping now and then, and if they're up for it, I don't know.
I'll give you a quick insight as to a situation I had similar to that, and then I'll stick around afterward if you want to talk a little bit more. I was trying to reach somebody and was not getting a response back for quite a while. And then it occurred to me, the awareness hit me. I'm a little slow. It occurred to me a week or so later after the last time I had reached out that I wasn't getting a response. And I looked back at what I had done and I thought, oh, I bet they interpreted this as this. And so that's what I mentioned. I said, hey, when I did this, it occurs to me you may have interpreted it or it may have come across as this. I apologize for that. Here was what my intent was, but I understand what the impact was for sure. And sure enough, that's what it was. So it was a proactive reach out and explaining, I think I bungled it here. Am I reading that right? Yeah, really good point, Brad. So let's pop open a poll here. As we think about these 5 steps to recovering lost trust, the question is, as we pop the poll open, which one of these is the most difficult for you? Is it the awareness, assessment, active listening, accountability, or action? Okay. All right, we got some answers. Let's close it in 10 seconds. Kathy, if you would. I suppose I can't. I can do it right here. So here are the results. Action comes in 4 out of 7, 57% is the toughest, and then assessment and awareness. Good. Active listening, not really a problem for anybody, and accountability, not a problem. Well, as we start toward the end here, and if you need to drop off right at 45 minutes, please do. Love to hear what, Noelle, what's that?
Just
No?
inviting people to go away.
Oh, yeah. If you need to drop, totally understand. We mentioned 45 minutes, and we like to keep our commitments in as much as we can. But those of you that can hang on, what was your biggest takeaway from our time together, and how will you use it? What will you do about it? You don't have to put in what will you do about it, but just type into the chat if you would. What was your biggest takeaway from our time together? As you're putting that in, I'll just remind you that we've got tons of resources here at Trusted Advisors, the website, podcast, books, videos. We've got our workshops. They're the printed books, Trusted Advisor Academy. All of these can be a resource to you to help you build trust. So Victoria, realizing there is more than saying I'm sorry. Yeah, work both the emotional and the rational side of things. Living the trustworthiness equation, Darren, that's good. Yeah, you're obviously familiar with the work. You know that we call it the trustworthiness equation. Much better at executing in business than yes. Isn't that true? There's something about that, Jennifer, that it's easier sometimes in those relationships that may not be quite as close to us. It just can be a little bit easier. It's a little less threatening. Brian, realizing that the relationship won't be perfect. Yep, they flex and there's some bad perhaps. Great chance to recover stronger. Trust is the single most important component in his career as a management consultant. You're only as good as your reputation. Isn't that true, Wayne? And then Celeste, breaking down steps, think through situations clearly. That's great. Well, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. Remember, we're going to send the resources to you, the webinar recording, the presentation. Be on the lookout for that in your email. If you'd like to hang on and have some additional conversation, I'll stay on the line. If you need to drop, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate you adding to this discussion, and we'll see you down the road.
Hey, Kathy, do we have one more poll? Kathy? All right, thanks.
Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Good
thank you.
conversation. Noel, good to see you as always.
Wayne, always good to see you. Everything going well with you?
I can't complain, you know, just getting older and no more wiser, but older.
I find that hard to believe. But it's good seeing you. Reach out sometime. You're still in the area. We should grab a cup of coffee or lunch.
Yeah, we should. We should. I'm actually in DC typically about every other week now.
Cool.
We
Good
should
job.
do that.
All right. I
righty.
would love to catch up with you.
All righty. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you so much for today, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks,
All
Jennifer.
right. Hey,
Appreciate your
Jennifer,
thoughts.
meet Brandon. Brandon, meet Jennifer.
Hey,
All right.
reach
I
out.
I have some new things to report to you, Noel. So I was going to reach out via email, and then I saw your email, and I was like, so
Hey, yeah.
I have some news for you.
You have my cell phone number. Just give me a call.
Okay.
In my email block signature.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. Thanks.
Talk soon.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right.
Ina, did I pronounce your name even close to being correct?
Actually, yeah, it's exactly enough.
Good. Thank you.
I was introduced to the concept very recently, so it's very nice to me that this webinar happened that soon after. I'm still part of the wave and catching with all the information that I can find on the topic. Definitely
great.
thank you for today.
Great. Yeah, if you haven't checked it out, go to the blog on the website. A lot of great information there. You can search through the blog for particular topics as well. And then we'll send you resources that will help.
Cool. Very nice. Very nice. Like, I'm still reading my way through the topic. You know, I'm not completely there yet. And also this exchange that happened. And for me, it was the not obvious part was when somebody else hurts my trust and I feel responsible for it. So I'm trying to force solving the problem, you know, healing the relationship. But that's maybe another topic. But thank you for the time.
Yeah, thank you. Glad you're here. Appreciate your insight.
Have a nice day.
Yeah, you too.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
I'm in Germany, so it's a bit late, but enjoy.
Echt? Sie sind in Deutschland?
Yeah, yeah.
Aus welchem Teil?
Ich wohne in Düsseldorf.
Düsseldorf. Ich war in der Schweiz und Süddeutschland für 2 Jahre.
Ach so, ja. Ich glaube,
Ja.
das kann man ein bisschen an dem Akzent erkennen.
Ja, genau. Es ist kein Düsseldorf und gar nicht ein Hamburger Akzent.
Ja. Und
Ja.
wo sind Sie jetzt?
Denver, Colorado.
In Denver, all right. I'm originally Bulgarian, so it's like a very mix here.
Yep, very European.
But enjoy. Thank you a lot.
Alles
Bye.
Gute. Ciao. Danke.
Ciao.